The kingdom had been preparing for the royal wedding for nearly a year. Every city displayed banners bearing the crest of the crown. In House Evermore, merchants sold commemorative coins. Nobles traveled from distant territories. Even neighboring kingdoms sent representatives to witness the union. The marriage between Alpha King Darius Valacrest and Lady Celeste Evermore was expected to become the most important political event of the decade. It would strengthen alliances, stabilize trade routes, end years of tension between powerful noble factions. Everything was arranged. Everything was certain, until it wasn't. 3 days before the wedding, Lady Celeste Evermore vanished. No farewell letter, no explanation, no witnesses. One moment she was inside the Evermore estate. The next, she was gone. Panic erupted immediately. Search parties combed nearby forests. Royal scouts investigated roads and ports. Servants were questioned. Guards were interrogated. Nothing. The future Luna had disappeared without a trace. Inside the royal palace, emergency meetings continued late into the night. Council members argued across long conference tables. The wedding must be postponed. It can't be postponed. We need more time. The kingdom doesn't have more time. Every solution created new problems. If the wedding was canceled, rival territories might view it as a sign of weakness. Trade negotiations could collapse. Political enemies would seize the opportunity. The alliance had become too important to abandon. By the second day, tensions had reached dangerous levels. Then, House Evermore presented a proposal, a replacement bride. The announcement stunned the council. Alpha Lord Evermore stood before the royal assembly, looking exhausted. "We have another daughter." Silence filled the chamber. Several nobles frowned. Another daughter? Most had never heard such a thing. The Alpha Lord continued. "Her name is Seraphina Evermore." The name meant little to anyone present, because Seraphina rarely appeared in public. She attended no major celebrations, received no formal introductions, held no visible role within the family. To most of the kingdom, she barely existed. A council elder finally spoke. "Will she agree to this?" The Alpha Lord hesitated. "She understands her duty." No one missed the wording. Not wants, not chooses, understands. The distinction was significant. Hours later, the proposal reached Alpha King Darius. He listened quietly while advisors explained the situation. When they finished, the room waited. The kingdom's future depended on his answer. Darius leaned back in his chair. The marriage had never been about love. It had always been political. A different bride changed very little. Finally, he spoke. "If it preserves the alliance, proceed." The decision was made. The wedding would continue, and somewhere inside House Evermore, a forgotten daughter was about to become queen. Seraphina Evermore learned she was getting married from a servant. Not her father, not her stepmother, not even a family messenger. A nervous maid arrived at her door just after sunrise. "My lady, the Alpha Lord requests your presence." The woman's expression alone told Seraphina something was wrong. She set aside the book she had been reading and followed the servant through the vast halls of the Evermore estate. As always, few people noticed her passing. That wasn't unusual. For most of her life, she had existed like a shadow inside her own home, seen, yet somehow overlooked. The family portrait hanging in the main corridor was a perfect example. It displayed her father, her stepmother, her younger half-sister, Celeste, even several extended relatives. Seraphina wasn't included. The explanation had always been simple. There wasn't enough room. Nobody believed it, least of all her. When she entered the family sitting room, She immediately sensed the tension. Her father stood near the fireplace. His expression was strained. Across from him sat Lady Vivica Evermore, her stepmother. Unlike her husband, Vivica appeared remarkably calm, almost relieved. That alone made Serafina uneasy. "Father?" The Alpha Lord cleared his throat. "There has been a development." Serafina remained silent. Experience had taught her patience. Eventually, people revealed what they truly meant. "Your sister is missing." That surprised her. Not because she and Celeste were close. They weren't. But disappearing 3 days before a royal wedding was unthinkable. "I see." Her father looked away. Vivica stepped forward instead. "The kingdom requires the marriage to proceed." Suddenly, Serafina understood. The realization settled heavily inside her chest. Not shock, recognition. The kind that came from years of understanding her place in the family. The spare, the replacement. The daughter called upon only when something went wrong. "You want me to marry the king?" Neither parent immediately answered. That silence was answer enough. Vivica finally smiled. A practiced smile, the kind that never reached her eyes. "It is an extraordinary honor." Serafina almost laughed. Not because the situation was funny, because it was predictable. For years, she had been hidden from public life, ignored whenever recognition appeared. Yet now that the family faced disaster, suddenly she mattered. Suddenly she was useful. Her father stepped forward. "You have every right to refuse." The statement sounded sincere. Unfortunately, reality made it meaningless. Refusing would trigger scandal, humiliate the family, possibly damage the kingdom. Everyone in the room knew it, including him. Serafina looked out the window. The gardens beyond were peaceful, quiet, simple, very different from the chaos waiting beyond these walls. Finally, she turned back. "When is the wedding?" 3 days. The answer earned a faint smile. 3 days. To prepare for becoming Luna. To leave the only home she'd ever known. To marry a man she'd never met. "Very well," she said softly. "I'll do it." Relief immediately swept across both parents' faces, and somehow, that hurt more than anything else. The royal capital should have been celebrating. Instead, it was whispering. Every street, marketplace, and noble estate buzzed with rumors about the replacement bride. No one knew much about Serafina Evermore, and when people lack facts, they create stories. By the morning of the wedding, the entire kingdom seemed to have one. "I heard she's sickly. They kept her hidden for years. Perhaps there's some scandal. Poor Alpha King." The speculation grew more ridiculous with every retelling. Inside the royal cathedral, nobles filled row after row of polished silverwood pews. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the enormous hall. Moonstone pillars stretched toward the vaulted ceiling. Everything looked magnificent. Yet beneath the beauty lingered a sense of disappointment. This wasn't the wedding people expected. Many had traveled specifically to witness Celeste Evermore become Luna. Now they found themselves attending a ceremony surrounded by uncertainty. At the front of the cathedral stood Alpha King Darius Valacrest. Tall, composed, immovable. He wore formal royal attire embroidered with silver thread, the symbol of his position gleaming across his chest. From the outside, he appeared calm. Inside, he felt little beyond obligation. The marriage was necessary. That was enough. Romance had never been part of the arrangement. Several advisors approached him one final time. "Your Majesty, the guests have arrived." Darius nodded. Another advisor lowered his voice. "There are still concerns among certain noble families." "About the bride?" The advisor hesitated. "Among other things." Darius's expression didn't change. If they dislike the arrangement, they are welcome to govern the kingdom themselves. The advisor immediately fell silent. A moment later, the cathedral doors opened. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. The bride had arrived. Serafina entered slowly. A long silver gown flowed behind her. An elegant veil concealed her face completely. Not a glimpse of her features was visible. The nobles leaned forward instinctively, trying to see, trying to judge, trying to satisfy their curiosity. They failed. The veil revealed nothing. Darius watched her approach. For a brief moment, he studied her, the graceful way she carried herself, the steady pace, the complete absence of nervous theatrics. Then he looked away. The details hardly mattered. In a few hours, the wedding would be complete, the alliance secured, the crisis resolved. That was what mattered, nothing else. Serafina reached the altar and took her place beside him. They stood shoulder to shoulder, strangers connected by duty. The high elder stepped forward. His ceremonial robes shimmered beneath the cathedral lights. "We gather today beneath the blessing of the moon goddess." His voice echoed through the hall. The ceremony had begun. Around them, the crowd settled into silence. But beneath that silence, speculation continued. Questions lingered. Assumptions formed. And hidden behind her veil, Serafina listened to every whispered judgment. Without speaking a single word, the wedding ceremony continued beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. The high elder recited ancient vows. Nobles listened respectfully. Servants moved quietly along the edges of the cathedral. Everything unfolded exactly as tradition required. Except for one thing. Nobody truly cared about the ceremony itself. They cared about the bride. Every few minutes, whispers resurfaced. Soft enough to avoid reprimand, loud enough to spread. "I still can't believe they found a replacement so quickly. Have you ever seen her before?" "Never." "There must be a reason they kept her hidden." Serafina heard every word. Years of being overlooked had sharpened her ability to notice things others missed. She recognized pity, curiosity, suspicion, the familiar ingredients of judgment. None of it surprised her. What surprised her was how little it affected her now, perhaps because she had endured worse, or perhaps because once a person spends years being invisible, strangers' opinions lose their power. Beside her, Alpha King Darius remained focused on the ceremony, at least outwardly. His attention never lingered on her, never drifted toward the veil, never showed curiosity about the woman he had just married. To him, this was politics, nothing more. The realization should have stung. Oddly, it didn't, because Serafina expected nothing from him. Expectations were dangerous things. She had learned that lesson long ago. Eventually, the final vows arrived. The high elder raised his ceremonial staff. "By the authority granted to me beneath the moon goddess, I declare this union complete." Applause echoed through the cathedral. The kingdom now had a Luna, officially. Yet even as the celebration began, the whispers intensified. Several nobles near the front made little effort to hide their opinions. One elderly lord shook his head. The kingdom expected a jewel. His companion laughed quietly and received a compromise. A few others chuckled. The words spread. Cruel, dismissive, careless. Serafina lowered her gaze, not because she was hurt, because she knew responding would accomplish nothing. What surprised her was something else entirely. Darius heard them. She knew he did. The nobles weren't far away. The comments weren't subtle. Yet the Alpha King said nothing. Not a correction, not a warning, not a single word. He simply ignored them, not out of agreement, Out of indifference, the distinction mattered, and somehow made the insult worse. The High Elder eventually stepped forward once more, his voice carried across the cathedral. There remains one final tradition. The room quieted immediately. Everyone knew what came next: the unveiling, the official presentation of the new Luna before the royal pack. For the first time all day, genuine anticipation swept through the crowd. The High Elder turned toward Darius. "Your Majesty?" Every eye shifted to the Alpha King, then to the veiled bride beside him. The moment had arrived. Darius reached toward the silver veil, and the entire cathedral held its breath. Silence settled over the cathedral. Thousands of eyes focused on a single moment: the unveiling. For generations, it had symbolized the official introduction of a Luna to her people. Normally, it was little more than tradition. Today, it felt like the answer to a kingdom-wide mystery. Who was Seraphina Evermore? The forgotten daughter, the replacement bride, the woman no one seemed to know. Darius stood facing her. For the first time since the ceremony began, he looked directly at his wife. Not at the veil, not at the situation, at her. Though even now, he could see nothing beyond silver fabric. The High Elder nodded. "Proceed, Your Majesty." Darius reached for the edge of the veil. The material was surprisingly light beneath his fingers. For a brief moment, the entire cathedral seemed frozen. No whispers, no movement, no sound. Then he lifted it. The veil fell away, and the world stopped. A sharp intake of breath echoed somewhere in the crowd. Then another. Then dozens more. Not polite surprise, shock, pure and complete. Darius stared. For the first time all day, genuine emotion broke through his calm exterior. Because the woman standing before him looked nothing like the rumors, nothing like the assumptions, nothing like the image people had created. Seraphina possessed the unmistakable features of the ancient Moonblood lineage. Silver eyes, bright and striking beneath the cathedral lights, hair darker than midnight, framing elegant features that seemed almost unreal. And most shocking of all, faint silver markings shimmered near her temples. Ancient royal markings, rare, extraordinarily rare. Several elders immediately rose to their feet. One elderly noble nearly dropped his cane. A priestess openly gasped. The reaction spread like wildfire. People weren't merely impressed by her beauty. They were stunned by what it represented. Moonblood traits had not appeared so strongly in generations. For years, historians considered the lineage nearly dormant. Yet here it stood, alive, hidden, standing beside the Alpha King. "Impossible," someone whispered. Another elder shook his head. "No." His voice trembled. "It isn't impossible." The silence deepened. Across the cathedral, members of House Evermore looked visibly uncomfortable, especially Lady Vivica. For the first time all day, fear appeared in her eyes, because she understood something the crowd had not yet realized. Questions were coming, dangerous questions. Questions about why Seraphina had been hidden for so long. Questions about inheritance. Questions about family history. Questions she desperately did not want answered. Meanwhile, Darius found himself unable to look away. Not because of her beauty, though it was undeniable. Not even because of the Moonblood markings. It was something else. For the first time, he realized how completely wrong everyone's assumptions had been, including his own. The forgotten daughter was supposed to be a political compromise. Instead, she looked like someone born to stand beside a throne. And suddenly, the Alpha King wanted answers. By sunrise, the entire capital was talking about Seraphina Evermore. Not the wedding, not the alliance, not the political significance of the marriage. Only Seraphina. The story spread through markets, noble estates, council offices, and military barracks with astonishing speed. The forgotten daughter, the hidden moonblood heir, the Luna no one had expected. Every version of the story ended with the same question. Why was she hidden? Inside the royal palace, the atmosphere felt equally unsettled. Servants whispered in hallways, advisors exchanged uneasy looks, even council members seemed distracted. Because the question wasn't merely interesting, it was dangerous, very dangerous. Darius discovered that immediately. During the morning council session, discussion repeatedly drifted toward the same topic. One elder finally voiced what everyone was thinking. Your Majesty, the moonblood markings. The room fell silent. Darius folded his hands. What about them? The elder hesitated. Those traits are exceptionally rare. Another council member nodded. Historically, they appear most strongly among primary heirs. Several nobles exchanged meaningful glances. No one explicitly mentioned House Evermore. They didn't need to. The implication hung heavily in the room. If Seraphina possessed stronger moonblood traits than her younger half-sister, then questions about inheritance became unavoidable. Questions about legitimacy, questions about succession, questions about why the kingdom had spent years hearing about one daughter while the other remained invisible. Darius listened quietly. The more he heard, the more dissatisfied he became. Not because of politics, because nobody seemed capable of providing answers. The council speculated. The nobles guessed. The historians theorized. Yet no one actually knew the truth. By midday, the uncertainty had become irritating. The Alpha King preferred facts. Not rumors, not assumptions. Facts. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the palace, Seraphina found herself experiencing an entirely different problem. Attention. Everywhere she went, people stared. Servants bowed more deeply. Nobles suddenly treated her with respect. Ladies, who would have ignored her a week earlier, now sought introductions. The abrupt change felt absurd. Nothing about her had actually changed. Only what people knew, or thought they knew. As she walked through one of the palace gardens, two noblewomen stopped speaking the moment she approached. They smiled nervously, then hurried away. Seraphina almost laughed. Yesterday, they would have ignored her. Today, they looked intimidated. The inconsistency was exhausting. That evening, Darius stood alone inside the royal archives, reviewing historical records. Several books lay open across a large wooden table. Moonblood lineage histories, inheritance laws, noble family registries. The deeper he searched, the more one conclusion emerged. Something about House Evermore didn't add up, and judging by the nervous reactions he'd witnessed all day, someone knew it. As he closed another ledger, the Alpha King's expression hardened, because for the first time since the wedding, he wasn't thinking about politics. He was thinking about his wife, and why an entire family seemed desperate to keep her forgotten. The royal archives remained illuminated long after midnight. Most of the palace had gone to sleep. The servants retired. The council members returned to their estates. Even the guards rotated into quieter shifts. Yet, Alpha King Darius Valicrest remained seated at a massive oak table surrounded by centuries of records. His patience was beginning to wear thin, not because he lacked answers, because every answer led to a larger question. A senior royal historian stood nearby, sorting through stacks of ledgers. The elderly scholar adjusted his spectacles and carefully opened another registry. Your Majesty, I found something. Darius looked up immediately. The historian placed an old inheritance record on the table. This document was filed 23 years ago. Darius studied the page. The writing appeared authentic. The seals were legitimate. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. Then he noticed a correction, a small alteration hidden among several paragraphs. His eyes narrowed. What was changed? The historian hesitated. The order of succession. Silence. The scholar continued. Originally, the document identifies Lady Seraphina Evermore as primary heir to several family territories. Darius stared at him. And afterward, the historian slid a second document forward. A newer version. The same inheritance, the same territories, the same signatures, but one critical difference. The heir listed was no longer Seraphina. It was Celeste. Darius felt a cold irritation settle inside him. How many records were altered? The historian swallowed. We don't know yet. That answer was unacceptable. By dawn, additional researchers had joined the investigation. The discoveries worsened quickly. Property transfers, financial reports, educational records, public registries. Again and again, the same pattern emerged. References to Seraphina appeared briefly, then disappeared. Accomplishments attributed elsewhere. Inheritance rights redirected. Recognition reassigned. It wasn't one isolated mistake. It was systematic, deliberate, years of careful manipulation hidden beneath administrative paperwork. By midday, the evidence filled an entire section of the archive. Several council members arrived to review the findings personally. The atmosphere grew increasingly tense. One advisor looked visibly disturbed. Someone spent years erasing her. No one argued, because the evidence made denial impossible. Meanwhile, inside the palace gardens, Seraphina remained unaware of the full extent of the investigation. She spent the morning reviewing reports from local officials and discussing harvest forecasts with agricultural representatives. Work felt familiar, comfortable, far easier than navigating royal attention. The irony wasn't lost on her. For years, nobody cared what she accomplished. Now everyone seemed fascinated. She preferred the old ledgers, the old projects, the old responsibilities. At least they made sense. Back in the archives, another discovery brought the room to a complete standstill. The historian carefully unfolded a sealed legal document. His expression changed instantly. Your Majesty. Darius looked up. The old scholar's hands were trembling. You're going to want to see this, because lying before them was not merely proof of manipulation. It was proof of motive. And once the contents became public, House Evermore would never be the same again. The atmosphere inside the royal archives had become suffocating. No one spoke unnecessarily. No one wanted to be the first to say what everyone was beginning to suspect. The document lying on the table was old, older than most of the records they had reviewed. Its parchment had yellowed with age. The wax seal remained intact, and once opened, it explained everything. Darius read the contents twice, then a third time, because the truth was difficult to believe. The document was the original succession declaration prepared after the death of Seraphina's mother. According to Evermore law, the firstborn daughter inherited primary rights to several family territories, holdings, and titles. The language was clear, unambiguous, legal, and the named heir was Seraphina Evermore. Not Celeste, not anyone else. Seraphina. A heavy silence settled over the room. One council member finally spoke. Then she was always the rightful heir. The historian nodded. Yes. Another advisor looked troubled. Which means Lady Celeste should never have held those rights. Again, the answer was yes. Darius closed the document slowly. For years, House Evermore had presented Celeste as the family's future. The celebrated daughter, the public face, the noble heiress. Meanwhile, the actual heir had been hidden from society. The implication was impossible to ignore. Someone had benefited enormously from that arrangement. And there was only one obvious candidate, Lady Vivica Evermore, the stepmother. By evening, additional witnesses had been interviewed: former servants, retired tutors, estate administrators. The stories matched with disturbing consistency. Whenever Serafina excelled, recognition vanished. Whenever opportunities appeared, they somehow found their way to Celeste. Educational honors, public introductions, social invitations. Everything had followed the same pattern. One elderly former governess provided the most revealing testimony. "I always wondered why Lady Serafina was discouraged from attending public functions." Darius looked up sharply. "Discouraged?" The woman hesitated, then nodded. Lady Vivica feared comparisons. The room became very quiet. The governess continued softly. "Because once people met both girls, they naturally paid attention to the wrong daughter." The statement landed like a hammer, not because it was cruel, because it made sense. Suddenly, every missing piece aligned. The isolation, the altered records, the absence from public life, the years of invisibility. None of it happened by accident. It had been carefully engineered. Elsewhere in the palace, Serafina sat alone in a small library overlooking the gardens. A book rested open in her lap. Though she hadn't turned a page in nearly 20 minutes, something felt different. The palace seemed tense. Whispers followed her everywhere. Conversation stopped when she entered rooms. Questions lingered in people's eyes. She didn't yet know why, but she suspected the truth was approaching. And deep down, that possibility frightened her more than she wanted to admit. Because if the kingdom finally learned what had happened, so would Darius, and she wasn't sure what that would change. Back in the archives, the Alpha King stared out the window into the darkening night. For the first time since the wedding, he wasn't angry about politics. He was angry on behalf of someone else, his wife, the woman who had endured years of erasure without complaint, and for reasons he couldn't fully explain. That realization unsettled him more than any scandal ever could. The scandal exploded exactly as everyone expected. Within days, every noble house in the kingdom knew the truth. House Evermore had hidden its rightful heir. Inheritance records had been manipulated. Opportunities had been redirected. For years, Serafina Evermore had been systematically pushed into the background, while her younger half-sister enjoyed the attention meant for someone else. The public reaction was immediate: outrage, condemnation, demands for accountability, and above all, expectation. Everyone expected Serafina to retaliate. Some wanted a public confrontation. Others anticipated lawsuits, land disputes, or formal accusations. A few nobles openly hoped for a spectacular family collapse. After all, scandal was entertaining when it belonged to someone else. But Serafina disappointed them. She did absolutely nothing, at least nothing dramatic. Instead of seeking revenge, she attended council meetings. Instead of making speeches, she reviewed administrative reports. Instead of humiliating her stepmother, she focused on solving problems. The response confused nearly everyone. One noblewoman complained during a luncheon, "If I were her, I'd destroy them." Another nodded eagerly. "Exactly." An elderly duchess quietly stirred her tea. "That's why you're not Luna." The conversation ended immediately. Meanwhile, Serafina's days became increasingly busy. The kingdom faced dozens of ordinary challenges: trade disputes, road repairs, harvest planning, water shortages in several southern territories. Problems that required solutions rather than outrage. She preferred it that way. Work had always made more sense than politics. One afternoon, a heated disagreement erupted during a council session. Two regional governors spent nearly an hour arguing over transportation funding. The discussion went nowhere. Voices rose. Tempers flared. Frustration spread through the chamber. Finally, Serafina opened a ledger. If we redirect unused maintenance funds from the eastern routes and combine them with the projected trade surplus, both projects can proceed. Silence. The governors blinked. Several advisors checked the figures. After a few moments, one council member nodded slowly. That would work. The argument ended almost instantly. Not because Serafina possessed authority, because she possessed answers. The pattern repeated itself throughout the following weeks. A merchant conflict, solved. Agricultural concerns, resolved. Border administration issues, improved. Gradually, something unexpected began happening. People stopped talking about the scandal and started talking about her competence. Even those determined to dislike her struggled to find criticism, because competence was difficult to attack, especially when it produced results. One evening, Darius reviewed reports from multiple territories. The same name appeared repeatedly. Serafina. Serafina recommended this reform. Serafina resolved that dispute. Serafina improved that project. The consistency was impossible to ignore. For years, he had assumed House Evermore hid a weak daughter, an inconvenient daughter, a forgettable daughter. Instead, the kingdom had somehow overlooked one of its most capable leaders. Darius set the reports aside, then leaned back in his chair. A realization slowly settled over him. The most surprising thing about Serafina wasn't her beauty. It wasn't the moonblood markings. It wasn't even the scandal. It was the simple fact that after everything she'd endured, she still chose to build rather than destroy. And somehow, that impressed him more than anything else. By the time winter arrived, Serafina had become impossible to ignore. Not because of the wedding, not because of the scandal surrounding House Evermore, and not because of the Moonblood lineage that continued to fascinate historians. She had become impossible to ignore because the kingdom kept improving. Roads once abandoned were being repaired. Trade routes generated record profits. Disputes that once dragged on for months now ended within days. Everywhere people looked, progress followed. And increasingly, one name appeared behind it: Luna Serafina. The Midwinter Assembly was meant to celebrate those achievements. Representatives from every territory traveled to the capital. Nobles filled the palace. Military leaders attended. Merchants arrived from distant regions. For 3 days, the kingdom's most influential people gathered beneath one roof. Naturally, it also became the perfect opportunity for political attacks. Darius expected them. So did Serafina. Success always attracted opposition. The Grand Assembly Hall overflowed with voices as delegates presented reports and proposals. Everything proceeded smoothly until Lord Marius Thornwick requested permission to speak. The nobleman was wealthy, ambitious, and known for disguising insults as observations. The moment he stood, several council members exchanged concerned looks. Marius smiled pleasantly. "Your Majesty, before we continue, I wish to address a matter of leadership." The room quieted. Serafina remained seated, watching, waiting. Marius continued. "Many individuals earn influence through talent and accomplishment." His tone remained polite, almost respectful. Almost. Others acquire influence through fortunate circumstances. There it was. The implication hung openly in the air. Not subtle enough to deny, not direct enough to challenge. A calculated insult. Several nobles shifted uncomfortably. Everyone understood his target. Serafina, the Luna who married a king, the former forgotten daughter, the woman some still insisted had gained authority through position rather than merit. Marius folded his hands. I simply believe the kingdom should remember the difference. Silence followed. The nobleman clearly expected outrage, defensiveness, perhaps even embarrassment. Instead, Serafina calmly stood. The room watched carefully. She crossed to a nearby table, carrying several ledgers. No anger, no visible irritation, only composure. Then she opened the first ledger. 3 months ago, agricultural reforms increased northern production by 16%. She presented the documentation. Then another report. Trade adjustments expanded eastern revenue by 22%. More evidence. Another ledger. Another report. Another set of figures. For nearly 20 minutes, Serafina systematically outlined completed projects, measurable results, and documented improvements. Every statistic verified, every claim supported, every success undeniable. The hall grew quieter with each page, not because people were bored, because the evidence was overwhelming. By the time she finished, nobody remembered the accusation. They remembered the results. Serafina closed the final ledger, then looked directly at Lord Thornwick. I agree. The nobleman blinked. She continued calmly. The kingdom should absolutely remember the difference between influence granted by position and influence earned through service. Silence. Absolute silence. Because everyone understood exactly what she meant, and everyone knew she was right. A moment later, applause erupted. Not polite applause. Not ceremonial applause. Genuine applause. It spread across the hall like wildfire. Council members, merchants, military officers, regional leaders, even several nobles who privately disliked her joined in, because denying the evidence had become impossible. Across the room, Lord Thornwick sat down without another word. For perhaps the first time in years, he had no argument left. And seated beside Serafina, Darius realized something important. The kingdom had once fallen silent because of her appearance. Now it fell silent because of her capability. And somehow, the second achievement impressed him far more.